the 16th book of Homer's Iliads. The argument. Achilles at Patroclus' suit doth yield his arms and Myrmidons, which brought to field the Trojans fly. Patroclus hath the grace of great Sarpedon's death, sprung of the race of Jupiter, he having slain the horse of Thetis' son, fierce Pedasus. The force of Hector doth revenge the much rude end of most renowned Sarpedon on the friend of Thetis, first by Euphorbus harmed, and by Apollo's personal power disarmed. Another argument. In Pi, Patroclus bears the chance of death imposed by Hector's lance. Thus fighting for his well-built ship, Patroclus all that space stood by his friend, preparing words to win the Greeks his grace, with power of uncontained fears. And like a fountain poured in black streams from a lofty rock, the Greeks so plagued deplored Achilles, ruthful for his tears, said, "Wherefore weeps my friend so like a girl, who though she sees her mother cannot tend her childish humours, hangs on her, and would be taken up, still viewing her with tear-drowned eyes, when she hath made her stoop, to nothing like her I can shape thy so unseemly tears. What causeth them? Hath any ill solicited thine ears befallen my Myrmidons? Or news from loved Phthia brought, told only thee, lest I should grieve, and therefore thus hath wrought on thy kind spirit? Actor's son, the good Menoetius, thy father lives, and Peleus mine, great son of Aeacus, amongst his Myrmidons, whose deaths in duty we should mourn. Or is it what the Greeks sustain, that doth thy stomach turn, on whom, for their injustice sake, plagues are so justly laid? Speak, man, let both know either's heart. Patroclus, sighing, said, O Peleus' son, thou strongest Greek by all degrees that lives, still be not angry, our sad state such cause of pity gives. Our greatest Greeks lie at their ships sore wounded, Ithacus, King Agamemnon, Diomed, and good Eurypylus. But these much medicine-knowing men physicians can recure. Thou yet unmedicinable still, though thy wound all endure, heaven lest my bosom from such wrath as thou soothest as thy bliss, unprofitably virtuous. How shall our progenies, born in thine age, enjoy thine aid, when these friends in thy flower thou leavest to such unworthy death? O idle, cruel power! Great Peleus never did beget, nor Thetis bring forth thee, thou from the blue sea, and her rocks, derivest thy pedigree. What so declines thee? If thy mind shuns any augury related by thy mother queen from heaven's foreseeing eye, and therefore thou forsakes thy friends, let me go ease their moans with those brave relics of our host, thy mighty Myrmidons, that I may bring to field more light to conquest than hath been. To which end grace me with thine arms, since any shadow seen of thy resemblance, all the power of perjured Troy will fly, and our so tired friends will breathe, our fresh set-on supply will easily drive their wearied off. Thus foolish man he sued for his sure death, of all whose speech Achilles first renewed the last part thus. O worthy friend, what have thy speeches been? I shun the fight for oracles, or what my mother queen hath told from Jove. I take no care, nor note of one such thing. But this fit anger stings me still, that the insulting king should from his equal take his right, since he exceeds in power. This, still his wrong, is still my grief. He took my paramour that all men gave, and whom I won by virtue of my spear, that, for her, overturned a town. This rape he made of her, and used me like a fugitive, an inmate in a town that is no city libertine, nor capable of their gown. But bear we this as out of date, 'tis past, nor must we still feed anger in our noblest parts, Yet thus I will have my will, as well as our great King of men. For I did ever vow never to cast off my disdain till, as it falls out now, their missive me knocked at my fleet, and told me in their cries I was revenged, and had my wish of all my enemies. And so of this repeat enough. Take thou my fame-blazed arms, and my fight-thirsty Myrmidons lead to these hot alarms. Whole clouds of Trojans circle us with hateful eminence. The Greeks shut in a little shore, a sort of citizens skipping upon them, all because their proud eyes do not see the radiance of my helmet there, whose beams had instantly thrust back, and all these ditches filled with carrion of their flesh. If Agamemnon had been kind, where now they fight as fresh, as thus far they had put at ease, and at our tents contend. And may, for the repulsive hand of Diomed doth not spend his raging darts there, that their death could fright out of our fleet, nor from that head of enmity can my poor hearers meet the voice of great Atrides now. Now Hector's only voice breaks all the ear about both hosts, and with the very noise bred by his loud encouragements, his forces fill the field, and fight the poor Achaeans down. But on, put thou my shield betwixt the fire-plague and our fleet. Rush bravely on, and turn war's tide as headlong on their throats. No more let them adjourn our sweet home turning, but observe the charge I lay on thee to each least point, that thy ruled hands may highly honor me, and get such glory from the Greeks, that they may send again my most sweet wench, and gifts to boot, when thou hast cast a rein on these so headstrong citizens, and forced them from our fleet. With which grace, if the gods of sounds thy kind aggression greet, retire, and be not tempted on, with pride to see thy hand rain slaughtered carcasses on earth, to run forth thy command as far as Ilion, lest the gods, that favor Troy, come forth to thy encounter, for the sun much loves it, and my worth. In what thou sufferest will be wrong that I would let my friend assume an action of such weight without me, and transcend my friend's prescription. Do not then affect a further fight that I may strengthen. Let the rest, when thou hast done this right, perform the rest. O would to Jove, thou Pallas, and thou Sun, that not a man housed underneath those towers of Ilion, nor any one of all the Greeks, how infinite a sum soever all together make, might live unovercome. But only we two, scaping death, might have the thundering down of every stone stuck in the walls of this so sacred town. Thus spake they only twixt themselves. And now the foe no more could Ajax stand, being so oppressed with all the iron store the Trojans poured on, with whose darts and with Jove's will beside his powers were cloyed, and his bright helm did deafening blows abide. His plume and all bead ornaments could never hang in rest. His arm yet laboured up his shield, and having done their best, they could not stir him from his stand, although he wrought it out with short respirings, and with sweat that ceaseless flowed about his reeking limbs, no least time given to take in any breath, ill strengthened ill. When one was up, another was beneath. Now, Muses, you that dwell in heaven, the dreadful mien inspire, that first enforced the Grecian fleet to take in Trojan fire. First Hector with his huge broadsword cut off, at setting on, the head of Ajax' ashen lance, which Ajax seeing gone, and that he shook a headless spear, a little while unware, his wary spirits told him straight the hand of heaven was there, and trembling under his conceit, which was that 'twas Jove's deed, who, as be pulled off his darts' heads, so sure he had decreed, that all the counsels of their war he would pull off like it, and give the Trojans victory. So trusted he his wit, and left his darts. And then the ship was heaped with horrid brands of kindling fire, which instantly was seen through all the strands in unextinguishable flames, that all the ship embraced, And then Achilles beat his thighs, cried out, Patroclus, haste! Make way with horse! I see at fleet a fire of fearful rage. Arm, arm, lest all our fleet it fire, and all our power engage. Arm quickly, I'll bring up the troops. To these so dreadful wars, Patroclus in Achilles' arms enlightened all with stars, and richly amelled all haste made. He wore his sword, his shield, his huge plumed helm, and 2 such spears as he could nimbly wield. But the most famed Achilles' spear, big, solid, full of weight, he only left of all his arms, for that far past the might of any Greek to shake but his. Achilles' only ire shook that huge weapon that was given by Chiron to his sire, cut from the top of Pelion to be heroes' deaths. His steeds Automedon straight joined, like whom no man that breathes. Next Peleus' son Patroclus loved, for like him none so great he found in faith at every fight, nor to outlook a threat. Automedon did therefore guide for him Achilles' steeds, Xanthius and Boleus, swift as wind, begotten by the seeds of Zephyr, and the harpy born Pordarge in a mead close to the wavy ocean where that fierce harpy fed. Automedon joined these before, and with the hindmost gears he fastened famous Pedasus, whom from the massacres made by Achilles when he took Eetion's wealthy town, he brought, and though of mortal race, yet gave him the renown to follow his immortal horse. And now, before his tents, himself had seen his Myrmidons in all habiliments of dreadful war. And when ye see, upon a mountain bred, a den of wolves about whose hearts unmeasured strengths are fed, new come from curie of a stag, their jaws all blood besmeared, and when from some black water fount they all together herd, there having plentifully lapped with thin and thrust out tongues, the top and clearest of the spring, go belching from their lungs the clotted gore, look dreadfully, and entertain no dread, their bellies gaunt all taken up with being so rawly fed. Then say that such, in strength and look, were great Achilles' men, now ordered for the dreadful fight, and so with all them then, their princes and their chiefs did show about their general's friend, his friend and all about himself, who chiefly did intend the embattling of horse and foot, to that siege held so long. Twice 25 sail he brought, twice 25 strong, of able men was every sail, 5 colonels he made, of all those forces trusty men, and of all power to lead, but he of power beyond them all. Mnestheus was one that ever wore discolored arms, he was a river's son that fell from heaven, and good to drink was his delightful stream. His name unwearied Spercheius, he loved the lovely dame, fair Polydora, Peleus' seed, and dear in Boreas' sight, and she to that celestial flood gave this Mnestheus light. A woman mixing with a god, yet Boreas bore the name of father to Mnestheus, he marrying the dame, and giving her a mighty dower, he was the kind descent of Paraeres. The next man, renowned with regiment, was strong Eudorus, brought to life by one supposed a maid, right Polymela, Phylos' seed, but had the wanton played with Argus-killing Mercury, who, fired with her fair eyes, as she was singing in the choir of her that makes the cries, in clamorous hunting, and doth bear the crooked bow of gold, stole to her bed in that chaste room that Phoebe chaste did hold, and gave her that swift warlike son Eudorus brought to light, as she was dancing. But as soon as she that rules the plight of laboring women eased her throes, and showed her son the sun, strong Echeseus, actor's heir, wooed earnestly and won her second favor, feeing her with gifts of infinite prize, and after brought her to his house, where in his grandsire's eyes, O Phyllis, Polymele's son obtained exceeding grace, and found as careful bringing up as of his natural race he had descended. The third chief was fair Mamalides Pysandrus, who in skill of darts obtained supremest praise of all the Myrmidons, except their lord's companion. The fourth charge aged Phoenix had, the fifth Alcimedon, son of Laerces, and much famed. All these digested thus, in fit place by the mighty son of royal Peleus. This stern remembrance he gave all. You, Myrmidons, said he, lest any of you should forget his threatening use to me in this place, and through all the time that my just anger reigned, attempting me with bitter words, for being so restrained, for my hot humor from the fight, remember them as these. Thou cruel son of Peleus, whom she that rules the seas did only nourish with her gall, thou dost ungently hold our hands against our wills from fight. We will not be controlled, but take our ships and sail for home before we loiter here and feed thy fury. These thy words exceeding often were the threats that in your mutinous troops be used to me for wrath, to be detained so from the field. Now then, your spleens may bathe in sweat of those great works ye wished. Now he that can employ a generous heart, go fight, and fright these bragging sons of Troy. This set their minds and strengths on fire, the speech enforcing well, being used in time, but being their kings, it much more did impel, and closer rushed in all the troops. And as for buildings high, the mason lays his stones more thick against the extremity of wind and weather, and even then, if any storm arise, he thickens them the more for that. The present act so plies his honest mind to make sure work, for so the high estate this work was brought to, these men's minds, according to the rate, were raised and all their bodies joined, but their well-spoken king, with his so timely thought-on speech, more sharp made valor's sting, and thickened so their targets bossed, so all their helmets then, that shields prop shields, helms helmets knocked, and men encouraged men. Patroclus and Automedon did arm before them all, two bodies with one mind informed, and then the general betook him to his private tent, where from a coffer wrought, most rich and curiously, and given by Thetis to be brought, in his own ship, top filled with vests, warm robes to check cold wind, and tapestries all golden fringed, and curled with thrums behind. He took a most unvalued bowl, in which none drank but he, nor he but to the deities, nor any deity, but Jove himself was served with that, and that he first did cleanse with sulphur, then with fluences of sweetest water rens, then washed his hands, and drew himself a mighty bowl of wine, which, standing midst the place enclosed for services divine, and looking up to heaven and Jove, who saw him well, he poured upon the place of sacrifice, and humbly thus implored. Great Dodonius, president of cold Dodona's towers, divine Pelagicus, that dwellest far hence, about whose bowers the austere prophetic Selli dwell, that still sleep on the ground, go bare and never cleanse their feet, as I before have found, grace to my vows, and hurt to Greece, so now my prayers intend. I still stay in the gathered fleet, but have dismissed my friend amongst my many Myrmidons to danger of the dart. O grant his valor my renown, arm with my mind his heart, that Hector's self may know my friend can work in single war, and not then only show his hands so hot and singular, when my kind presence seconds him, but fight he ne'er so well, nor further let him trust his fight, but when he shall repel clamor and danger from our fleet, vouchsafe a safe retreat to him and all his companies, with fames in arms complete. He prayed, and heaven's great counselor gave satisfying ear to one part of his orisons, but left the other there. He let him free the fleet of foes, but safe retreat denied. Achilles left that utter part, where he his zeal applied, and turned into his inner tent, made fast his cup, and then stood forth, and with his mind beheld the foes fight, and his men, that followed his great-minded friend, and battled till they brake, with gallant spirit upon the foe, and as foul wasps that make their dwellings in the broad highway, which foolish children use, their cottages being near their nest, to anger and abuse, with ever vexing them and breed, to soothe their childish war, a common ill to many men, since if a traveller that would his journey end apply, and pass them unassayed, come near and vex them, upon him the children's faults are laid. For on they fly as he were such, and still defend their own. So fared it with the fervent mind of every Myrmidon, who poured themselves out of their fleet upon their wanton foes, that needs would stir them, thrust so near, and cause the overthrows of many others that had else been never touched by them, nor would have touched. Patroclus then put his wind to the stream, and thus exhorted, Now, my friends, remember you express your late urged virtue and renown our great Aeacides, that he being strongest of all the Greeks, his eminence made dim all others likewise in our strengths that far off imitate him. And Agamemnon now may see his fault as general as his place high, dishonoring him that so much honors all. Thus made he sparkle their fresh fire, and on they rushed. The fleet filled full her hollow sides with sounds that terribly did greet the amazed Trojans, and their eyes did second their amaze, when great Menoetius' son they saw, and his friend's armor blaze. All troops stood troubled with conceit that Peleus' son was there, his anger cast off at the ships, and each looked everywhere for some authority to lead the then prepared flight. Patroclus greeted with a lance the region where the fight made strongest tumult near the ship Protesilaus brought, and struck pikemen who before the fair-helmed peons fought, led from Amydon, near whose walls the broad-streamed Axius flows. Through his right shoulder flew the dart, whose blow struck all the blows in his power from his powerless arm, and down he groaning fell. His men all flying, their leader fled. This one dart did repel the whole guard placed about the ship, whose fire extinct half burned. The peons left her, and full cry to clamorous flight returned. Then spread the Greeks about their ships, triumphant tumult flowed, and as from top of some steep hill the lightner strips a cloud, and lets a great sky out from heaven, in whose delightsome light all prominent foreheads, forests, towers, and temples cheer the sight. So cleared these Greeks this Trojan cloud, and at their ships and tents obtained a little time to breathe, but found no present vents to their inclusions, nor did Troy, though these Paeonians fled, lose any ground, but from this ship they needfully turned head. Then every man a man subdued. Patroclus in the thigh struck Areilycus, his dart the bone did break, and fly quite through and sunk him to the earth. Good Menelaus slew accomplished Thoas, in whose breast, being naked, his lance he threw above his shield, and freed his soul. Phylides, taking note that bold Amphimaclus bent at him, prevented him, and smote his thigh's extremest part, where of a man his fattest muscle lies, the nerves torn with his lance's pile, and darkness closed his eyes. Antilochus Antimnius seized, his steel lance did impress his first 3 guts, and loosed his life. At young Nestorides, Maris, Antimnus' brother, flew, and at him Thrasimid, the brother to Antilochus, his eager javelin's head, the muscles of his arm cut out, and shivered all the bone. Night closed his eyes, his lifeless corse his brother fell upon. And so by two kind brothers' hands did two kind brothers bleed, both being divine Sarpedon's friends, and were the darting seed of Amisodorus, that kept the bane of many men abhorred Chimera, and such bane now caught his children. Ajax o Iliades did take Cleobulus alive, invading him stayed by the press, and at him then let drive with his short sword that cut his neck, whose blood warmed all the steel, and cold death with a violent fate his sable eyes did seal. Peneleus and Lycon cast together off their darts, both missed, and both together then went with their swords. In parts the blade and hilt went, laying on upon the helmet's height. Peneleus' sword caught Lycon's neck, and cut it thorough quite. His head hung by the very skin. The swift Meriones, pursuing flying Acamas, just as he got access to horse and chariot, overtook, and took him such a blow on his right shoulder that he left his chariot, and did strow the dusty earth. Life left his limbs, and night his eyes possessed. Idomeneus his stern dart at Aramis addressed, as, like to Acamas, he fled. It cut the sundry bones beneath his brain, betwixt his neck and foreparts, and so runs, shaking his teeth out through his mouth, his eyes all drowned in blood. So through his nostrils and his mouth, that now dart open stood, he breathed his spirit. Thus had death from every Grecian chief, a chief of Troy. For as to kids or lambs, their cruelest thief the wolf steals in, and when he sees that by the shepherd's sloth the dams are dispersed about the hills, then serves his ravenous tooth with ease, because his prey is weak. So serve the Greeks their foes, discerning well how shrieking flight did all their spirits dispose. Their biting virtues quite forgot, and now the natural spleen that Ajax bore to Hector still, by all means, would have been within his bosom with a dart. But he that knew the war, well covered in a well-lined shield, did well perceive how far the arrows and the javelins reached, by being within their sounds and ominous singings, and observed the therein clinging bounds of conquest in her aid of him, and so obeyed her change, took safest course for him and his, and stood to her as strange. And as, when Jove intends a storm, he lets out of the stars, from steep Olympus a black cloud, that all heaven's splendors bars from men on earth, so from the hearts of all the Trojan host, all comfort lately found from Jove, in flight and cries was lost. Nor made they any fair retreat. Hector's unruly horse would needs retire him, and he left and gauged his Trojan forced by the steepness of the dike, that in ill place they took, and kept them that would fain have gone. Their horses quite forsook a number of the Trojan kings, and left them in the dike. Their chariots in their four teams broke. Patroclus then did strike, while steel was hot, and cheered his friends, nor meant his enemies good, who, when they once began to fly, each way received a flood, and choked themselves with drifts of dust, and now were clouds begot beneath the clouds. With flight and noise the horse neglected not their home intendments, and where rout was busiest, there poured on Patroclus most exhorts and threats, and then lay overthrown numbers beneath their axle trees, who lying in flight's stream made the after chariots jot and jump in driving over them. The immortal horse Patroclus rode did pass the dike with ease, and wished the depth and danger more, and Myrmidons as great a spirit had to reach, retiring Hector's haste, but his fleet horse had too much law, and fetched him off too fast. And as in autumn the black earth is loaden with the storms, that Jove in gluts of rain pours down, being angry with the forms of judgment inauthorized men that in their courts maintain, with violent office wrested laws, and, fearing gods nor men, exile all justice, for whose fault whole fields are overflown, and many valleys cut away, with torrents headlong thrown from neighbor mountains, till the sea received them roaring in, and judged men's labors that are vain, plagued for their judges' sin. So now the foul defaults of some all Troy were laid upon, so like those torrents roared they back to windy Ilion, and so like tempests blew the horse, with ravishing back again those hot assailants, all their works at fleet now rendered vain. Patroclus, when he had dispersed the foremost phalanxes, called back his forces to the fleet, and would not let them prease, as they desired, too near the town, but twixt the ships and flood, and their steep rampire, his hand steeped revenge in seas of blood. Then Pronous was first that fell beneath his fiery lance, which struck his bare breast near his shield. The second Thestor's chance, old Enops' son, did make himself, who shrinking and set close in his fair seat, even with the approach Patroclus made, did lose all manly courage, insomuch that from his hands his reins fell flowing down, and his right jaw Patroclus' lance attains, struck through his teeth, and there it stuck, and by it to him drew dead Thestor to his chariot. It showed as when you view an angler from some prominent rock draw with his line and hook a mighty fish out of the sea, for so the Greek did pluck the Trojan gaping from his seat, his jaws oped with the dart, which when Patroclus drew he fell, his life and breast did part. End of the 16th book, Part 1. The 16th book of Homer's Iliads, Part 2. Then rushed he on Euryalus, at whom he hurled a stone, which strake his head so in the midst, that two was made of one. 2 ways it fell, cleft through his casque. And then Tlepolemus, Epaltes, Damastorides, Avippus, Echius, Iphias, bold Amphoterus, and valiant Aramis, and Polymelus, by his sire surnamed Argeadus, he heaped upon the much-fed earth. When Jove's most worthy son, divine Sarpedon, saw these friends thus stayed, and others run, "O shame! Why fly ye?" then he cried. "Now show ye feet enow, on keep your way. Myself will meet the man that startled you, to make me understand his name, that flaunts in conquest thus, and hath so many able knees so soon dissolved to us." Down jumped he from his chariot, down leaped his foe as light, and as on some far-looking rock a cast of vultures fight, fly on each other, strike and truss, part, meet, and then stick by, tug both with crooked beaks and sears, cry, fight and cry. So fiercely fought these angry kings, and showed as bitter galls. Jove, turning eyes to this stern fight, his wife and sister calls, and much moved for the Lycian prince, said, "Oh, that to my son fate by this day in man should cut a thread so nobly spun. 2 minds distract me, if I should now ravish him from fight, and set him safe in Lycia, or give the fates their right." "Austere Saturnius," she replied, "what unjust words are these? A mortal, long since marked by fate, wouldst thou immortalize? Do, but by no god be approved, free him and numbers more, sons of immortals, will live free, that death must taste before these gates of Ilion. Every god will have his son a god, or storm extremely. Give him then an honest period, in brave fight by Patroclus' sword, if he be dear to thee, and grieves thee for his dangered life, of which, when he is free, let death and Somnus bear him hence, till Lycia's natural womb receive him from his brother's hands, and citizens a tomb and column raise to him. This is the honor of the dead. She said, and her speech ruled his power, but in his safety's stead, for sad ostent of his near death, he steeped his living name in drops of blood heaven sweat for him, which earth drunk to his fame. And now, as this high combat grew to this too humble end, Sarpedon's death had this state more. 'Twas ushered by his friend and charioteer, brave Thrasymed, who in his belly's rim Patroclus wounded with his lance, and endless ended him. And then another act of name foreran his princely fate. His first lance missing, he let fly a second that gave date of violent death to Patroclus, who, as he joyed to die, by his so honorable hand, did even in dying neigh. His ruin startled the other steeds, the gears cracked and the reins strappled his fellows, whose misrule Automedon restrains, by cutting the entangling gears, and so disundering quite the brave slain beast, that both the rest obeyed, and went for right. And then the royal combatants fought for the final stroke, when Lycia's general missed again, his high-raised javelin took above his shoulder empty way. But no such speedless flight Patroclus let his spear perform, that on the breast did light of his brave foe, where life strings close about the solid heart, impressing a cureless wound. His knees then left their part, and let him fall, when like an oak, a poplar or a pine, new felled by artsmen on the hills, he stretched his form divine before his horse and chariot, and as a lion leaps upon a goodly yellow bull, drives all the herd in heaps, and under his unconquered jaws the brave beast sighing dies, so sighed Sarpedon underneath this prince of enemies, called Glaucus to him, his dear friend, and said, Now, friend, thy hands much duty owe to fight in arms. Now for my love it stands, thy heart in much hand to approve that war is harmful. Now how active all thy forces are, this 1 hour's act must show. First call our Lycian captains up, look round and bring up all, and all exhort to stand like friends about Sarpedon's fall. And spend thyself thy steel for me, for be assured no day of all thy life to thy last hour can clear thy black dismay, in woe and infamy for me, if I be taken hence, spoiled of my arms, and thy renown despoiled of my defence. Stand firm then, and confirm thy men. This said, the bounds of death concluded all sight to his eyes, and to his nostrils breath. Patroclus, though his guard was strong, forced way through every doubt, climbed his high bosom with his foot, and plucked his javelin out, and with it drew the film and strings of his yet panting heart. And last, together with the pile, his princely soul did part. His horse, spoiled both of guide and king, thick snoring and amazed, and apt to flight, the Myrmidons made nimbly to, and seized. Glaucus, to hear his friend ask aid, of him past all the rest. Though well he knew his wound uncured, confusion filled his breast. Not to have good in any power, and yet so much good will, and laying his hand upon his wound, that pained him sharply still, and was by Teucer's hand set on, from their assailed steep wall. In keeping hurt from other men, he did on Phoebus call, the god of medicines, for his cure. Thou king of cures, said he, that art perhaps in Lycia with her rich progeny, or here in Troy, but anywhere, since thou hast power to hear. O give a hurt and woeful man, as I am now thine ear. This arm sustains a cruel wound, whose pains shoot every way, afflicts this shoulder and this hand, and nothing long can stay, a flux of blood still issuing, nor therefore can I stand with any enemy in fight, nor hardly make my hand support my lance, and here lies dead the worthiest of men, Sarpedon, worthy son to Jove, whose power could yet abstain from all aid in this deadly need. Give thou then aid to me, O King of all aid to men hurt, assuage the extremity of this arm's anguish, give it strength, that by my precedent I may excite my men to blows, and this dead course prevent of further violence. He prayed, and kind Apollo heard, allayed his anguish, and his wound of all the black blood cleared, that vexed it so, infused fresh powers into his weakened mind, and all his spirits flowed with joy that Phoebus stood inclined, in such quick bounty to his prayers. Then as Sarpedon willed, he cast about his greedy eye, and first of all instilled to all his captains all the stings that could inflame their fight for good Sarpedon, and from them he stretched his speedy pace to Agenor, Hector, Venus' son, and wise Polydamas, and only naming Hector said, Hector, you now forget your poor auxiliary friends, that in your toils have sweat their friendless souls out far from home. Sarpedon that sustained with justice, and his virtues all, broad Lycia hath not gained the like guard for his person here, for yonder dead he lies, beneath the great Patroclus' lance. But come, let your supplies, good friends, and stand near him. O disdain to see his course defiled with Grecian fury, and his arms by their oppressions spoiled. These Myrmidons are come enraged, that such a mighty boot of Greeks' Troy's darts have made it fleet. This said, from head to foot, grief strook their powers past patience, and not to be restrained, to hear news of Sarpedon's death, who, though he appertained to other cities, yet to theirs he was the very fort, and led a mighty people there, of all whose better sort himself was best. This made them run in flames upon the foe. The first man Hector, to whose heart Sarpedon's death did go, Patroclus stirred the Grecian spirits, and first the Ajaces thus, Now, brothers, be it dear to you to fight and succor us, as ever heretofore ye did, with men first excellent. The man lies slain that first did scale and raise the battlement that crowned our wall, the Lycian prince. But if we now shall add force to his course, and spoil his arms, a prize may more be had of many great ones that for him will put on to the death. To this work these were prompt enough, and each side ordereth those phalanxes that most had rate of resolutions, the Trojans and the Lycian powers, the Greeks and Myrmidons. These ran together for the course, and closed with horrid cries, their armors thundering with the claps laid on about the prize. And Jove about the impetuous broil pernicious night poured out, as long as for his loved son pernicious labor fought. The first of Troy, the first of Greeks foiled, when, not the last indeed, amongst the Myrmidons was slain, the great Achilles' seed, divine Appius, that before had exercised command in fair Budaius, but because he laid a bloody hand on his own sister's valiant son, to Peleus and his queen he came for pardon and obtained. His slaughter being the mean, he came to Troy, and so to this he ventured even to touch the princely carcass, when a stone did more to him by much, sent out by able Hector's hand. It cut his skull in twain, and strook him dead. Patroclus grieved to see his friend so slain, before the foremost thrust himself, and as a falcon frays a flock of stares or caddises, such fear brought his assays amongst the Trojans and their friends, and angry at the heart, as well as grieved for him so slain, another stony dart, as good as Hector's, he let fly, that dusted in the neck of Sthenelaus, thrust his head to earth first, and did break the nerves in sunder with his fall. Off fell the Trojan too, even Hector's self, and all as far as any man can throw, provoked for games or in the wars to shed an enemy's soul, a light long dart, The first that turned was he that did control the targeteers of Lycia, Prince Glaucus, who to hell sent Patroclus, Chalcon's son. He did in Hellas dwell, and shine for wealth and happiness amongst the Myrmidons. His bosom midst the javelin strook, his fall gat earth with groans. The Greeks grieved, and the Trojans joyed, for so renowned a man, about whom stood the Grecians firm. And then the death began on Troy's side by Myrmidons. He slew one great in war, Laogonus, Onetor's son, the priest of Jupiter, created in the Idaean hill. Betwixt his jaw and ear the dart stuck fast, and loosed his soul, sad mists of hate and fear invading him. And Chryses' son dispatched a brazen lance at bold Myrmidons, and hoped to make an equal chance on him with bold Laogonus, though under his broad shield he lay so close. But he discerned, and made his body yield so low, that over him it flew, and trembling took the ground, with which Mars made it quench his thirst. And since the head could wound no better body, and yet thrown from ne'er the worse a hand, it turned from earth and looked awry. Aeneas let it stand, much angry at the vain event, and told Myrmidons he scaped but hardly, nor had cause to hope for such success another time, though well he knew his dancing faculty, by whose agility he scaped. For had his dart gone by with any least touch, instantly he had been ever slain. He answered, Though thy strength be good, it cannot render vain the strength of others with thy jest, nor art thou so divine. But when my lance shall touch at thee, with equal speed to thine, death will share with it thy life's powers. Thy confidence can shun no more than mine what his right claims. Menoetius' noble son rebuked Myrmidons, and said, What needst thou use this speech? Nor thy strength is approved with words, good friend, nor can we reach the body, nor make the enemy yield with these our counter-braves. We must enforce the binding earth to hold them in her graves. If you will war, fight. Will you speak? Give counsel, counsel's blows are the ends of wars and words. Talk here, the time in vain bestows. He said and led, and nothing less for anything he said. His speech being seasoned with such right, the worthy seconded. And then, as in a sounding vale, near neighbor to a hill, woodfellers make a far-heard noise, with chopping still, and laying on blocks and trees, so they on men laid load, and beat like noises into air, both as they strook and trode. But past their noise, so full of blood, of dust, of darts, lay smit divine Sarpedon, that a man must have an excellent wit, that could but know him and might fail. So from his utmost head, even to the low plants of his feet, his form was altered, all thrusting near it every way, as thick as flies in spring, that in a sheepcote, when new milk assembles them, make wing, and buzzed about the top-full pails. Nor ever was the eye of Jove averted from the fight. He viewed, thought ceaselessly and diversely upon the death of great Achilles' friend. If Hector there to wreak his son should with his javelin end his life, and force away his arms, or still augment the field, he then concluded that the flight of much more souls should yield Achilles' good friend more renown, and that even to their gates he should drive Hector and his host, and so disanimates the mind of Hector, that he mounts his chariot, and takes flight up with him, tempting all to her, affirming his insight, knew evidently that the beam of Jove's all-ordering skulls was then in sinking on their side, surcharged with flocks of souls. Then not the noble Lycians stayed, but left their slaughtered lord amongst the corse's common heap, for many more were poured about and on him, while Jove's hand held out the bitter broil. And now they spoiled Sarpedon's arms, and to the ships the spoil was sent by Myrmidons. Then Jove thus charged the sun, Haste, honored Phoebus, let no more Greek violence be done to my Sarpedon, but his course of all the sable blood, and javelins purged, then carry him far hence to some clear flood, with whose waves wash, and then embalm each thorough cleansed limb with our ambrosia, which performed, divine weeds put on him, and then to those swift mates and twins sweet sleep and death commit his princely person, that with speed they both may carry it to wealthy Lycia, where his friends and brothers will embrace, and tomb it in some monument, as fits a prince's place. Then flew Apollo to the fight from the Idalian hill, at all parts putting into act his great commander's will, drew all the darts, washed, balmed the course, which decked with ornament by sleep and death those feathered twins he into Lycia sent. Patroclus then Automedon commands to give his steeds large reins, and all way to the chase, so madly he exceeds the strict commission of his friend, which had he kept, had kept a black death from him. But Jove's mind hath evermore outstepped the mind of man, who both affrights and takes the victory from any hardiest hand with ease, which he can justify, though he himself commands him fight, as now he puts this chase in Myrmidons' mind. How much then weighs the grace, Patroclus, that Jove gives thee now, in skulls put with thy death, of all these great and famous men the honorable breath, of which Adrestus first he slew, and next Autonous, Epistora, and Paramus, Pilartes, Elysus, swift Menalippus, Molius, all these were overthrown by him, and all else put in rout. And then proud Iliad had stooped beneath his glorious hand, he raged so with his lance. If Phoebus had not kept the tower, and helped the Ilians, sustaining ill thoughts 'gainst the prince, thrice to the prominence of Troy's steep wall he bravely leaped, thrice Phoebus thrust him thence, objecting his all-dazzling shield with his resistless hand. But fourthly, when like one of heaven he would have stirred his stand, Apollo threatened him and said, Cease, it exceeds thy fate, forward, Patroclus, to expugn with thy bold lance this state, nor under great Achilles' powers, to thine superior far, lies Troy's grave ruin. When he spake, Patroclus left that war, leaped far back, and his anger shunned. Hector detained his horse within the Scaean port, in doubt to put his personal force amongst the rout, and turn their heads, or shun in Troy the storm. Apollo, seeing his suspense, resumed the goodly form of Hector's uncle Asius, the Phrygian Dymas' son, who near the deep Sangarius had habitation, being brother to the Trojan queen. His shape Apollo took, and asked of Hector why his spirit so clear the fight forsook, affirming 'twas unfit for him, and wished his forces were as much above his as they moved in an inferior sphere. He should with shame to him be gone, and so bade drive away against Patroclus to approve, if he that gave them day would give the glory of his death to his preferred lance. So left he him, and to the fight did his bright head advance, mixed with the multitude, and stirred foul tumult for the foe. Then Hector bade Cebriones put on, himself let go all other Greeks within his reach, and only gave command to front Patroclus. He at him jumped down, his strong left hand a javelin held, his right a stone, a marble sharp and such as his large hand had power to grip, and gave it strength as much as he could lie to, nor stood long in fear of that huge man that made against him, but full on with his huge stone he ran, discharged and drave it twixt the brows of bold Cebriones. Nor could the thick bone there prepared extenuate so the access, but out it drave his broken eyes, which in the dust fell down, and he dived after, which conceit of diving took the son of old Menoetius, who thus played upon the other's bane. O heavens, for truth this Trojan was a passing active man, with what exceeding ease he dives, as if at work he were within the fishy seas. This man alone would furnish cheer for 20 men, though 'twere a storm to leap out of a sail, and gather oysters for them all. He does it here so well, and there are many such in Troy. Thus jested he so near his own grave death, and then made in to spoil the charioteer, with such a lion's force and fate, as often ruining stalls of fat oxen, gets at length a mortal wound to sting his soul out of that ravenous beast that was so insolent, and so his life's bliss proves his bane, so deadly confident. Wert thou, Patroclus, in pursuit of good Cebriones, to whose defence now Hector leaped, the opposite address these masters of the Cryan war now made was of the kind of 2 fierce kings of beast, opposed in strife about a hind slain on the forehead of a hill, both sharp and hungry set, and to the curie never came, but like 2 deaths they met. Nor these 2 entertained less mind of mutual prejudice about the body, close to which, when each had pressed for prize, Hector the head laid hand upon, which once gripped never could be forced from him. Patroclus then upon the feet got hold, and he pinched with as sure a nail. So both stood tugging there, while all the rest made eager fight, and grappled everywhere. And as the east and south winds strive to make a lofty wood bow to their greatness, barky elms, wild ashes, beeches bowed, even with the earth, in whose thick arms the mighty vapors lie, and tossed by turns all either way, their leaves at random fly. Boughs murmur, and their bodies crack, and with perpetual din the sylvans falter, and the storms are never to begin. So raged the fight, and all from flight plucked her forgotten wings, while some still stuck, still new winged shafts flew dancing from their strings. Huge stones sent after that did shake the shields about the course, who now in dust soft forehead stretched forgat his guiding horse. As long as Phoebus turned his wheels about the midst of heaven, so long the touch of either's darts the falls of both made even. But when his wane drew near the west, the Greeks past measure were the abler soldiers, and so swept the Trojan tumult clear from off the body, out of which they drew the hurled-in darts, and from his shoulders stripped his arms, and then to more such parts. Patroclus turned his striving thoughts to do the Trojans ill. Thrice, like the god of war, he charged, his voice as horrible, and thrice 9 those 3 charges slew, but in the 4th essay, O then, Patroclus, showed thy last, the dreadful sun made way against that onset. Yet the prince discerned no deity, he kept the press so, and besides obscured his glorious eye with such felt darkness. At his back he made a sudden stand, and twixt his neck and shoulders laid down right with either hand, a blow so weighty that his eyes a giddy darkness took, and from his head his 3-plumed helm the bounding violence shook, that rung beneath his horse's hoofs, and like a water-spout was crushed together with the fall, the plumes that set it out, all spattered with black blood and dust, whenever heretofore it was a capital offence to have or dust or gore, to file a triple-feathered helm, but on the head divine and youthful temples of their prince it used untouched to shine. Yet now Jove gave it Hector's hands, the other's death was near, besides whose lost and filed helm his huge long weighty spear, well bound with iron, in his hand was shivered, and his shield fell from his shoulders to his feet, the baldric strewing the field. His curates left him like the rest, and all this only done by great Apollo. Then his mind took in confusion the vigorous knittings of his joints dissolved, and thus dismayed, a Dardan, one of Panthus' sons, and one that overlaid all Trojans of his place with darts, swift footing, skill and force, in noble horsemanship, and one that tumbled from their horse, one after other, 20 men, and when he did but learn the art of war, nay, when he first did in the field discern a horse and chariot of his guide, this man with all these parts, his name Euphorbus, comes behind, and twixt the shoulders darts forlorn Patroclus, who yet lived, and the other, getting forth his javelin, took him to his strength, nor durst he stand the worth of thee, Patroclus, though disarmed, who yet discomfited by Phoebus and Euphorbus' wound, the red heap of the dead, he now too late shunned and retired. When Hector saw him yield, and knew he yielded with a wound, he scoured the armed field, came close up to him, and both sides strook quite through with his lance. He fell, and his most weighty fall gave fit tune to his chance, for which all Greece extremely mourned, and as a mighty strife about a little fount begins, and riseth to the life of some fell boar resolved to drink, when likewise to the spring a lion comes alike disposed, the boar thirsts, and is king, both proud, and both will first be served, and then the lion takes advantage of his sovereign strength, and the other, fainting, makes resign his thirst up with his blood. Patroclus so enforced, when he had forced so much brave life, was from his own divorced. And thus his great divorcer braved. Patroclus, thy conceit gave thee the aversions of our Troy, and to thy fleet a freight of Trojan ladies, their free lives put all in bands by thee. But too much prizer of thyself, all these are propped by me, for these have my horse stretched their hooves to this so long a war, and I, far best of Trojan arms, keep off from Troy as far, even to the last beam of my life, their necessary day. And here in place of us and ours, on thee shall vultures prey. Poor wretch, nor shall thy mighty friend afford thee any aid, that gave thy parting much deep charge. And this perhaps be said, Marshal Patroclus, turn not face, nor see my fleet before, the curates from great Hector's breast, all gilded with his gore, thou hewest in pieces. If thus vain were his far-stretched commands, as vain was thy heart to believe his words lay in thy hands. He, languishing, replied, This proves thy glory worse than vain, that when two gods have given thy hands what their powers did obtain, they conquering and they spoiling me both of my arms and mind, it being a work of ease for them, thy soul should be so blind, to oversee their evident deeds, and take their powers to thee, when if the powers of 20 such had dared to encounter me, my lance had strewed earth with them all, thou only dost obtain a third place in my death, whom first a harmful hate hath slain, affected by Latona's son, second and first of men, Euphorbus. And this one thing more concerns thee, note it then, thou shalt not long survive thyself, nay now death calls for thee, and violent fate, Achilles' lance shall make this good for me. Thus death joined to his words his end, his soul took instant wing, and to the house that hath no lights descended, sorrowing, for his sad fate, to leave him young, and in his ablest age. He dead, yet Hector asked him why, in that prophetic rage, he so forspake him, when none knew, but great Achilles might prevent his death, and on his lance received his latest light. Thus setting on his side his foot, he drew out of his wound his brazen lance, and upwards cast the body on the ground. When quickly, while the dart was hot, he charged Automedon, divine guide of Achilles' steeds, in great contention to seize him too, but his so swift and deathless horse, that fetched their gift to Peleus from the gods, soon wrapped him from his reach. End of the 16th book, Part 2.